The best things in life are free, but you can keep them for the birds and bees. Now give me more. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want.
Well, if you have money, lots and lots and lots of money, you can probably buy your political candidate, which might make many of you feel, why vote? This is a sad statement, a sad day, and a sad decision by the Supreme Court for we, the people of the United States of America. Joining us, the president of Public Citizen, and more than a pleasure to have with us. Joining us later in the hour, Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent from Vermont, will be joining us as well. But president of Public Citizen, Mr. Robert Weissman, is with us this hour. More than a pleasure to have him with us. Mr. Weissman, thank you for joining us. Good evening.
It's good to be with you.
I read your statement regarding this ruling and the ruling by the Supreme Court today in McCutcheon versus the FEC. You wrote that it strikes a devastating blow at the very foundation of our democracy. I agree with you 100 billion%. Obviously, that's not even possible. But explain to people listening why this is a blow to our democracy, because this is not necessarily just about left or right. I believe it's about right and wrong.
Yeah, and I think actually people across the political spectrum agree with you. The short version of what the Supreme Court decided today is that super rich people have the right to contribute $5.9 million, maybe even more, directly to political candidates, parties, and political committees in an election cycle. That's up from a current limit of $123,000. There are only a few hundred people in the country who will contribute at that level, who have the ability to and the interest in contributing at that level. They are going to do it, and they are going to expect something back in return, and they're going to get it.
When we look at our nation, over 360 plus million people, and you're talking about technically the Supreme Court enabling a few hundred super rich individuals, right, the top 1-2% of this nation, to be able to spend outrageously large sums on campaign contributions. This, you wrote, outweighs the national interest in political equality. And when we speak of equality, Mr. Weissman, are you shocked at a time when the majority of Americans agree we have a disparity in income and that income inequality is a problem for this nation and must be addressed, and even has helped some people, I would dare say Democrats, and I am a Democrat, in most recent elections, but at the end of the day, the majority, the 99%, say, hey, somebody's got to level the playing field. Did the Supreme Court today spit on its people?
Oh, for sure. I mean, one thing, by the way, is it would be bad enough if this were a decision on behalf of the 1%. It's not a decision on behalf of the 1%. It's a decision on behalf of something like the 0.0001%. Because it's, when I say a few hundred people, I mean a few hundred people. And you're right. Out of more than 300 million people, we're talking about a few hundred people who were so empowered today by the Supreme Court. There's a major interconnection between the staggering rise in income and wealth inequality in this country over the last 3 decades and the problem we have of political spending. So on the one hand, you've got classes of people who have so much money to throw around, they can spend what seems to be an infinite amount if they're permitted to on campaign. So, you know, the Koch brothers, to take an example, their combined wealth went up $8 billion last year. Well, $8 billion is quite a lot of money. They got a lot of free money to spend on elections. So, and if you look at the people who spent more than $1 million last year, in the last election on super PACs, you know, those are all zillionaires. Most of them come out of the financial sector where so much wealth has been concentrated in the last quarter century or so. So on the one hand, the income and wealth inequality makes the political equality situation even worse. On the other hand, what do these people do with their money? Well, they invest it in politicians and in favor of policies that further contribute to income and wealth inequality. You know, why can't we have a sensible tax system? Well, we can't have a sensible tax system because the rich who dominate the political spending process won't permit it. Why do we have a ridiculous obsession with budget deficits instead of providing jobs to everyone in this country? Well, because the rich who dominate the political donation process care more about budget deficits than they do about job deficits? Why do we have a trade policy that favors multinational corporations and is massively opposed by the majority of the American people on both sides of the political aisle? Well, because the corporations spend so much on the political process.
I want people to understand that, and you had written this, Mr. Weissman, that in practical terms, the decision means that one individual can write a single check for $5.9 million to be spent by candidates, political parties, and political committees. For people that scratch their head and say, okay, if an individual can write a single check for $5.9 million, and after the Citizens United ruling, and we didn't think things could get worse, and today proves we were wrong, but with the Citizens United ruling, corporations are people. Does that mean that a corporation can, in a sense, write a check for $5.9 million as an individual, or no? Because Citizens United, obviously, they have to spend to an outside organization.
Yeah, that's right. Not yet. Corporations don't have that right yet. The decision today was only about the traditional version of people, the kind who live and breathe. The law still prohibits, and the court hasn't done anything about the prohibition on direct corporate contributions to candidates. Citizens United did create corporate rights, but they were, as you say, the rights to contribute to outside groups, not directly to candidates.
But so when you talk about the Koch brothers, let's use them as an example. Each of them could write a check for $5.9 million, correct?
Yes, correct.
So
without blinking.
Without blinking. So when people say that, you know, this isn't really going to hurt the political process because it doesn't favor left or right, well, the Koch brothers really aren't left or right. They're civil libertarians who are Tea Party people, Tea-publicans as I like to call them, and they could hurt the political process because they technically could create a third party with this type of money. We will talk about that in a minute, and we will continue our conversation. When we come back, we're going to be rejoined by our guest, President of Public Citizen, Mr. Robert Weissman, and also joining us in this hour, Senator Bernie Sanders, Independent of Vermont, will be joining us as well. Don't go away. A lot to hear from these two illustrious gentlemen. We'll be back. I'm Leslie Marshall.
Leslie Marshall, when the truth matters. Give her a call now at 888-6-LESLIE.
Want to hear your conversation with Leslie after the show? Go to lesliemarshallshow.com/members.
And we're back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. Only true democracy in talk radio. And this may be the only democracy you get in the future, sadly, after the Supreme Court decision today. Joining us, someone I look up to a great deal, two men, actually, that I do. Mr. Robert Weissman, President of Public Citizen, has been with us, and he's holding. Mr. Weissman, thank you. And joining us now, the great independent from the great state of Vermont, where I loved to spend summers as a kid, Senator Bernie Sanders joins us. Senator Sanders, more than a pleasure to have you back on the program, sir. Unfortunately, under these circumstances with the Supreme Court ruling.
Well,
Good evening.
It's great to be with you, Leslie.
Senator Sanders, did you feel and believe that anything could be worse than Citizens United? And then today we found that it could be.
Well, I think after Citizens United, nothing surprises us in terms of decisions from the Supreme Court. And what this decision today is about is just further opening up the floodgates of big money into the political process and moving us away from our democratic roots into an oligarchic form of society. And where we are going very rapidly, Leslie, is a situation where millionaires and billionaires, folks like the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson, will be sitting in a room and will be, in a deeper sense, determining who senators and congressmen and governors are because of their ability now to spend unbelievable, and I mean unbelievable sums of money. This decision today enables them to go from something like $123,000 into individual candidates' campaigns into millions and millions of dollars. And, of course, Citizens United allows the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson to spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And you saw that spectacle last week in Las Vegas where Republican prospective candidates were kissing the ring of Sheldon Adelson and hoping that he would anoint them and give them hundreds of millions of dollars for their campaign. It's really a really tragic situation, and such a movement away from what democracy in this country is supposed to be.
I asked this very gently, Senator Sanders, but I think that you're the guy that I can ask this of. Do you look at, over the years, this court, perhaps more than any other, as maybe that some of the justices themselves have kissed that ring?
I think there's no, well, technically I cannot tell you that, although there's some evidence that may be the case. But at least ideologically, these five justices are working night and day to, for all intent and purposes, making the wealthiest people in this country even wealthier and even more powerful. And let me not get you too depressed, Leslie, and suggest to you I don't think this is the end of their game plan. I think at the end of the day, what people like Mitch McConnell and what the Republican leadership want is the end of all restrictions on campaign finance and the ability of the Koch brothers and other billionaire families, right-wing families, to be able to contribute as much money as they want in any way and form. Right now, they can, of course, spend hundreds of millions in terms of independent expenditures. I think that these guys are shooting for the day when the Koch brothers or anybody else could give millions of dollars to any candidate that they want.
There are people out there that are not political. They're
Right.
an independent. They don't. Maybe they're socially liberal and fiscally conservative, and they scratch their head and say, "Look, I'm not a constitutional scholar, but when I was taught in school about the Constitution, it is clear this isn't like the Bible where you try and figure out the interpretation. It is pretty clear. How could these Supreme Court justices come up with such a decision?" And of course, after another perplexing decision with Citizens United. This is the same Constitution we are all reading.
Right. I don't think it's terribly perplexing. What they believe is that freedom of speech means that billionaires should have the freedom to spend as much as they want, to buy big homes, to buy big yachts, to buy big cars, and to buy governments. It's the same principle. It's my money, and I want to spend it any way I would like. And if I happen to want to buy a United States Senate seat, that is my freedom. And anybody who is a billionaire can have that freedom. Now, the problem is that most people are not going to be spending, most people do not have the resources to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. So this is just an absurd ruling, an absurd concept, which absolutely opens the door for oligarchy in America.
There are a lot of people today saying that this benefits both parties. It doesn't even. Senator Schumer says it does. This isn't going to benefit Republicans more than Democrats. Do you agree with that?
No, not at all. I think it's easy for some people to say, well, there are billionaire Democrats who fund campaigns, so that's true. But I think if you look at the facts, there is no question. Why do you think it was Mitch McConnell and the Republicans who have been pushing for these radical changes in campaign finance law? Because they understand that behind them is, in fact, the Koch brothers. Let me just say a word about this, because I think people don't appreciate it. Last year alone, just in 1 year, Leslie, the wealth of the Koch brothers went from $68 billion to $80 billion. $12 billion increase in 1 year. Barack Obama and Mitt Romney each spent a little over $1 billion in their presidential campaigns. These guys could write a check tomorrow for $2 billion and still be $10 billion better than they were a year ago. They could spend $2 billion in the political process during the presidential election, Senate elections. And that is just extraordinary and a real undermining of everything that we stand for as a nation. Second point, you mentioned before that most people are not particularly political, and they may say, well, so what? Maybe, what difference does it make? Maybe both parties benefit. But here's the point. Please understand, even if you're not political, why do you think the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson are prepared to spend hundreds of millions of dollars? What do they want from that? And the evidence is pretty clear. Just look at what they stand for. These guys want more tax breaks for the wealthiest people in this country, despite the fact that 1 out of 4 corporations today doesn't pay a nickel in federal income taxes. These guys want to either privatize or make massive cuts in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, federal aid to education, that's the ability of kids to go to college, nutrition programs, food stamps. The Koch brothers themselves are major polluters. They are in the oil business, in the coal business, and they want to significantly weaken or eliminate the EPA's ability to control pollution. In other words, there is an agenda behind these contributions, and that is to make the wealthiest people even wealthier while doing away with many of the programs that the middle class and working families of this country depend upon.
Do you feel, Senator, that the decision today means that in November, and if not November, in the future, less people will go out and vote because there's already a feeling among many Americans that their vote doesn't count, and now with this decision, they might feel that their vote counts less?
Well, I think we have got to turn that around, and I think people like Public Citizen and Robert Weissman do a great job in this, and that is to explain to the American people really what is at stake. So I would hope, quite the contrary, that people who are now disappointed in what government is doing or not doing understand what is at stake. And what is at stake is something very, very simple. Do we want a government that represents simply the wealthiest people in this country, or do we want a government that represents ordinary people and is prepared to address the very, very serious problems facing this country? And that's the choice that we have. So I would hope, Leslie, that if anything, this decision will be a motivator for people to say, no, I am not going to let the Koch brothers and the other billionaires control this country. I am going to get involved in the political process, and we're going to take them on and defeat them.
One last question. We have a minute, Senator. I don't want to take much more of your time, and appreciate the time this evening. We spoke to the voters. Let's talk about a candidate. Because of this wealth, technically, a complete moron could be, no offense, Senator, well, let's do this way. A complete moron could become our president with this type of money, buying somebody a seat, like you said.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, that's where we are. Look, you saw that again in Las Vegas. I mean, what more do you need to see? You had prospective Republican candidates for president crawling before Sheldon Adelson and saying, please, bless my campaign, give me hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in order to become the next president of the United States. Is that really where we want to go as a nation? And I think not. I mean, I hope very much that this decision wakes up the American people and generates grassroots organizing for a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, moves us forward in terms of public funding of elections, but enables us to move forward to say that what American democracy is about, one person, one vote. The Koch brothers get a vote, Sheldon Adelson gets a vote, but they cannot buy elections because they're billionaires. That's what's at stake here.
Absolutely. Senator, thank you so much for being with us tonight. An honor to have you back on the show, and especially on this issue. I know this is a personal, passionate issue of yours. If people read all the stuff on Facebook and Twitter that you and your great crew put together.
Well, thank you very much, and you keep up the great work.
Thank you. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from the great state of Vermont. Robert Weissman's been kind enough to hold and allow the senator to speak, president of Public Citizen. Mr. Weissman, thank you for holding. Welcome back. Let's speak to that on the heels of that. And I know that your organization, Public Citizen, is really working hard on this being a motivator to get more people out to vote, because we certainly see we need that, especially in midterm elections. And quite frankly, my party, the Democrats, are lazier at getting their butts off the lazy boy to get out and vote in midterms than the Republicans.
Yeah, I think you're right. You know, the especially the outside spending that we've already seen enabled by Citizens United, so devoted to all this negative attack advertising. A big part of what the negative ads are about is depressing people, discouraging them, and deterring them from voting altogether. So that is a big part of the project, and as you're suggesting, and as Senator Sanders said, we just can't accept that. But I also do think that Bernie was right in saying, look, Citizens United sparked this grassroots movement for a constitutional amendment to overturn that decision and others and to reclaim our democracy. And it's grown more rapidly than anybody could have thought possible. And then today's decision, I think, is going to take it to a whole new level. We've had demonstrations across the country today, some on the West Coast just about to launch, more than 140 demonstrations in 38 states protesting this decision. You know, the same day the thing came down. People are fired up about this, and I think more and more people are going to be. I think we're going to really see this issue emerge as a defining issue of American politics, not just because all this money is going to be spent and it's going to shape politics that way, but because politicians, the public is going to demand that politicians take a stand on this, and it's going to be not about little incremental reforms, which we're going to push for, but are going to be completely inadequate after today, but really the far-reaching things, public financing, but combined with a constitutional amendment that gets rid of all of this lunatic Supreme Court jurisprudence that makes it just impossible to have sensible controls over campaign spending.
Speaking of Mr. Weissman, I want to ask you the same question, if you don't mind, that I asked of the senator with regard to who this benefits, Democrats or Republicans more so. Even Senator Schumer said, doesn't benefit one party more than the other. That's the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, if it does benefit both parties, are we looking at a time, maybe not November, but maybe in 2016, and if not, then the next election definitely, where every candidate, left and right, will have been bought, may not have the proper political experience to lead this nation and to be making decisions, voting in the best interest of its constituency?
Right. I don't think there's any question this unevenly benefits the Republican Party. The Republican National Committee was one of the parties that brought this case. It's McCutcheon, but the other party bringing the case was the Republican National Committee. So there's a pretty clear agenda there. At the same time, what the decision is going to mean is these giant checks are going to be written. Now, they're going to be distributed to candidates, but they're going to really run through party leaders and political leaders. So the parties, as against the outside spenders, as against even the candidates, the parties are going to gain power. Both parties, the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party. The Democrats are going to raise more money, probably a lot more money, as a result of this decision versus what they were able to do, yesterday and in previous election cycles. The Republicans also are going to raise a lot more. I think even more. They're going to benefit, even more, maybe significantly more than the Democrats do. So what does that mean? Well, I think it tilts the scales in favor of the Republicans. But at least as important, maybe far more important, is exactly what you're saying, which is it tilts the whole deal, both parties, all the candidates, all the elected officials, in favor of these giant donors. I mean, you're going to have the party leaders, you're going to have the leaders in the Congress asking people to write them $4 or $5 million checks. So these are going to be the most powerful people, most powerful elected people, the most powerful party people asking these super rich compatriots of theirs to write these gigantic checks. Well, that's who they're going to depend on. That's who they're going to owe their allegiance to, and that's who they're going to be responsive to when they're in office. And I think that's going to inevitably occur on both the Republican and the Democratic side.
As somebody who went to law school for just 2 semesters, has a master's in broadcast journalism, loves and has read the Constitution, and embraces more than any other amendment the first, especially because of what I do for a living, and a nation so great to give me that privilege and honor. It makes my skin crawl, and I think our founding forefathers are rolling in their graves, that somebody could link writing checks to our freedom of speech, which I think is clearly about our freedom of speech. And quite frankly, if anything, this is more about freedom of religion, because money certainly is the Koch brothers and many others' billionaires' God.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this is both Citizens United and this decision are unbelievably activist decisions by a court that a majority on the court that claims to be exactly the opposite. You've got people who claim to be originalists trying to go back to the original intent, inventing out of cloth whole new meanings for the Constitution, turning both the intent and common sense upside down. And as you say, they've turned the First Amendment, which is supposed to protect all of our rights to speech, into a protection for just this very small number of super rich people to throw money at the political process and drown out the voices of the rest of us.
One last question for you. Well, actually, I have two. First of all, what can people do in addition to getting out and voting who they want, regardless of who's been bought?
Yeah, well, we're going to have to fix this system. And that's going to mean overturning this decision. Now, because the court made this decision, and as well as the Citizens United decision on First Amendment constitutional grounds, Congress can't overturn these decisions. Congress can kind of work around the edges, but Congress cannot overturn these decisions. The court itself could overturn the decisions if it chose to, but absent that, we need a constitutional amendment. And what people need to do is get on board with the effort for a constitutional amendment. The easy way to do that is to go to overturnmccutcheon.org and get information there, get connected to this really fast-growing movement. We already have 16 states. Before today, we already have 16 states that have passed resolutions calling for a constitutional amendment. More than 500 cities and towns have passed resolutions. Before today, we had 140 members in Congress sponsoring constitutional amendments. President Obama in the past has said that he favors a constitutional amendment. All that stuff is going to really ratchet up dramatically in the days, weeks, and months ahead. But we're not going to succeed unless we get really millions of Americans engaged in this project. I think we're going to do that, and we have to do that. But we need everybody listening, really everybody who considers themselves patriotic, everybody who cares about the future of the country, everybody who cares about, all the things that we value, whether it's having safe food or clean water, worried about climate change, want to have minimum wage, want a safe workplace, don't want Wall Street ripping us off. All these things are really going to be dependent on fixing this completely disastrous campaign spending system, and the really crux of doing that is winning a constitutional amendment to clear out these Supreme Court decisions. There's no way we can have a working democracy in the system that the Supreme Court is creating for us.
I agree. Mr. Robert Weissman, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. President of Public Citizen. Let me just give you first to follow them on Twitter at @public_citizen. Also check them out on Facebook, facebook.com/public citizen. And Senator Sanders is sanders.senate.gov. Follow him at Sen Sanders and his facebook.com/Senator Sanders with a capital S at the end. I'm Leslie Marshall.